Hello, hobby friends, and welcome to another episode of Hobby Talk. My name is David Baez, and I'm delighted to welcome back Scott Levy, good friend of the show. Scott, welcome to the show again. Great to have you.
David, thanks for having me. My pleasure. I appreciate you wanted to hear my stories, and I'm just grateful to share them with you.
Yeah, Scott, I really look forward to all these interviews with you because with every episode, I've learned something new about you, something new about some of the players that I grew up admiring, and even some of those players that I just didn't know enough about that I ended up, being impressed with. So, with that, I'll start right off. Yeah, I would love to pivot over into that. Let's call it 90s era player and beyond. And why don't we start off with some of those like lighthearted and maybe funny moments you had, um, as you're in your tenure as a photographer. If you want to share some great stories with us regarding some of those players.
Absolutely. And you may recall we spoke about in a previous episode how I worked for Score Baseball Cards for 5 years and did another 15 years as a freelance photographer. And my assignment was always to try and get posed portraits and game action. And some players just really embrace the concept of doing portraits, and others just resisted. But I must say, and the fact that I speak Spanish really helped me, that I was able to communicate with a young Bernie Williams uh, who had braces at the time, a young Vladimir Guerrero also did not speak English, also with braces. And by getting them comfortable speaking in Spanish, they were just such wonderful guys. Okay.
That's awesome.
And it never shifted. Sometimes when a player was a young rookie and then he became a major superstar, Manny Ramirez, excuse me, their attitude kind of changes, right? So Manny was great when he first came up. Albert Bell, Joey Bell, and then when they got older, things kind of shifted. Forgive me for coughing, but
I love it.
I just got to say that a guy like Dale Murphy, if I needed 40 poses, no problem. Um, and after a while, the player gets to see you either at the same ballpark or other stadiums. And I remember the day I asked Robin Yount and Molitor, can I just take a picture of the two of you? And they said, sure. What would you like us to do? Okay. And Bo Jackson was always good to me, but Bo would say, you got one, meaning take your one shot and then I got to move on. So the
Right.
personalities of players varied dramatically. They would engage you in conversation. Bob Nepper, who I became friends with because of his love for photography. So I would help him with photography. He got me access to the '89 World Series because the Giants were in the World Series. And I just, um, you know, uh, Carlton Fisk comes to mind. He was such an iconic player. And I'm not usually intimidated, but when he had the eye black on and he walked out of the clubhouse with his cleats and you hear, and I'm going, wow, this is Carlton Fisk. He says, like, what do you need? I said, I
Right.
just need, I would always say, I just need, 5 seconds or 5 shots. If you told a player, look, I just need 4 shots, when they heard your camera click 4 times, they were gone.
Yeah.
Harold Reynolds would love to talk, and he was once running off he turned a double play during the game. I was in the third base photo pit at Yankee Stadium, and he ran off the field and he looked at me and he says, hey Doc, did you get that? Meaning that I capture him photographically turning the double play.
Right. To interrupt, Scott, but even in this brief moment now that you've shared these moments, I'm thinking to myself, wow, you hit the nail on the head just a minute ago about how sometimes we forget, you know, that besides the fact that they're obviously world-class athletes, you know, they're human beings outside of the field as well, and they have their personalities. and get a comfort level with them so that you can do your job, right? So that had to have been, like you said earlier, intimidating in some respects, right?
Absolutely. And this is all pregame. So they're preparing for the game, so their
Yeah,
mind's staying focused. And here I am. I'm asking a player to put a bat up on his shoulder, go down on one knee. And, you know, they would have batting practice 2 to 3 hours before the game. And the
right.
ball players are creatures of habit. They have a really set schedule. One day I approached Todd Helton and he said, "Okay, I'll do it. Be out on the field at 4:07." I said, "Okay, I'll be there." 4:07, Todd Helton walked out, gave me a couple of minutes, and he was a man of his word. There were other ball players who would say, "Get me after I hit in the cage," and I'm still waiting, you know. Or if a
Oh,
player didn't want to be photographed, he would have a big chaw of tobacco or gum in his cheek. Manny Ramirez. So he wouldn't. He was telling me he didn't really want to pose because, or some players would say, "Oh man, I just put the tobacco in my mouth," and I said, "I can't photograph
yeah,
you with." Um, so just so many great guys that always were cooperative. Ricky was Ricky. He preferred more candids, but he didn't mind. Other players,
right.
if they felt my long lens on them, that I was away from a distance, they still wouldn't want to be photographed. Dan Gladden would
Wow.
politely say, "Look, I just don't like portraits. Could you please get game action?" He was really friendly about it. Other guys,
Yeah,
Kirk Gibson, Bonds, etc., John Kruk, were a little more grumpy about it. So I
yeah.
had to balance which players could I pose for a portrait and who did I have to do a candid on where I wasn't right up in their face. And you get to see lighter heart moments pregame. I'll never forget I was in the dugout then it was Shea Stadium. The Astros were in town, and over the loudspeaker, "I Want You Back" by the Jackson 5 comes on, and Derek Bell and Ricky Gutierrez start to break out in a choreographed little dance like they were performing. It was
And you joined them?
hysterical. No, no, I mean, I wanted to, but it was just no, my steps weren't good enough. But
I
it
had
was
to
just,
learn to dance.
yeah. It was, you know, Ken Griffey Jr. I developed a relationship with Ken, but he always had his cap backwards. Only as a young rookie do I have portraits of him with the cap in the proper direction. And he would always be
Yeah,
playful. The same with Puckett. Kirby would say, "Oh man, you again." But you knew eventually they were just playing with you and they would give you an opportunity to get the pictures.
yeah, yeah.
So uh, just so many great. Canseco was a monster at the time. He also would give me one or two shots and he'd say, "You got it?" I'd say yes, and he'd move on just because everybody wanted a piece of them.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's something there's something to be said about that too. I think you said it best before, and you would know better than me for sure on this, but they're creatures of habit. A lot of these guys, they have a routine in their head. They're gonna go through this, then they're gonna go through that, then they kind of get game ready. So anytime they have to kind of deviate off course, they don't want to get too far off course because they're mentally and physically prepared for a battle on the field with that player that day, and so I get it, and I think, like you said, it's kind of refreshing to hear that some of the folks were very polite with you. So they were polite about it. You did your couple shots, and then they moved on.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, sometimes my editor would say, "Look, Scott, I can't use the image with the warm up top on." So I'd ask a player to put on the home white or a regular uni. And
Oh wow,
a lot of them a lot of them would say, "No problem, I'll be out in a couple of minutes." Other guys would say, "Look, you want the shot, you got to just shoot it with what I got on now," because they're focused for the game. But in spring
yeah,
training,
yeah,
every team is required to have a photo day, and that's about 7:30 or 8 o'clock, either in Florida or Arizona, where the whole team comes out in proper uniform, and they really don't look forward to that day because you have the Topps photographer, the other card companies, all the newspapers.
Right.
And it must have rained one day, the night before, and I'm doing the Mets. And Kevin McReynolds, I asked him if I could take some portraits, down on one knee with the bat on his shoulder. And he says, "Man, the ground looks wet." And I said, "No, Kevin, it's not really wet." He went down, put his knee into
Oh, no.
mud. He was
Oh,
so
he
pissed
must have
off.
loved you after that.
Oh my God. So I apologized profusely. And to lighten them up, because it's 7:30 in the morning,
Uh-huh.
at the time there was a song, "I Like It Like That," was popular. It was a real catchy dance tune. And next to
Yep.
me at my photo station, I had a little player to play the songs. And I remember Pedro Martinez just started to like dance, and I'm shooting away. And so I got the player to loosen up, you know, but there was nothing I could do to loosen, say, Kirk Gibson up, you know. I just knew that take the picture, don't look, and just move on. Some photographers would say, "Oh, stay away from George Bell or Pedro Guerrero or Eddie Murray." And I was lucky enough to get a couple of shots, and some photographers like, "You got Eddie Murray to pose for you?" And
Wow.
so everybody had their guys that they were comfortable with.
Yeah.
Sometimes a player will have an influence in a good way or a negative way. Like when Garrett Anderson came up as a rookie, and most rookies are really cooperative, he was standoffish and smug. And I remember he was good friends with like Chili Davis. Chili's a good guy, but he wasn't the friendliest. I think Chili had a little influence, say, on Garrett. The same way when Kenny Lofton came up, he was really cooperative. But then Albert Bell, he was hanging around with Albert Bell. But most of
Right.
the time, I could share stories about, the Younts, the Molitovs, Greg Maddux, Smoltz. And they just knew that it was part of their thing, that they had to satisfy the media, both written and photographically, and spend a little
Yeah.
time with them.
Now, I remember and I used it as an image for I think our first or second interview. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, where you mentioned Dale Murphy before. And there's a funny picture, I think, of you and Dale, and Dale's holding his own name in the picture, right? Is that correct what I'm saying or no?
Absolutely. So,
Yeah, I love that
spring
picture.
train. Yeah, that. So, in spring training, they can invite 70 players, or minor league rosters, part of it, or anyway. So, to identify, back then we were using film or slides to identify the player, because
Mhm.
I had to send it to the editor at SCORE, I'd have to have the player hold up his name and his number at the time. So everybody recognized Dale, but still, all players had that, and he made me hold up his number. So you'd have the alphabetic roster, and everybody had a correlated number. So Dale was kind of, joking with me about it. Some players
Yeah.
would get upset and say, "I don't have to hold it. You don't know who I am." Like I said, "Look, it's for the editor." You
Yeah.
know,
And the worst part was if it was like the backup catcher, for the last place team or something. It was like, you don't know who I am? I'm sorry, I don't. You're not Carlton Fisk.
you didn't want to insult the player, but say, "Please, it's not me. I just want to make sure my editor knows who everybody is."
Right, right.
So a lot of players would say, "Didn't you get my images on photo day?" They thought they were done taking photos once, and I'd say, "No. Either you were traded, or I need you in the different uniform." And like you said, you learn so much about their personalities,
Yeah, yeah,
and over time, I mean, Randy Johnson, he was very challenging. But when he was first a young guy with the Expos, he was great. And he loves
yeah,
photography, Randy, but he never posed for me after the first 2 years in the league, you know. But a guy like Derek
yeah.
Jeter, we always say, "What do you need?"
Yeah.
And always give you a few frames at least. You know,
Yeah.
um,
Some people live for the moment. Some people can, Derek was just one of those kids, like right out of the gate, like this, he's like, you just look at him playing and it's like, he looks like a seasoned veteran out there. And I was like, this kid's got it, some people, you just know they have it. So I'm not surprised, when he gets out there with the interviews, he handles himself like a pro. I'm not surprised to hear from you now that when it came to, pictures and photo ops and stuff like that, that he also handled himself like a pro.
absolute professional. He had a
Yeah.
positive influence in Don Mattingly, Tim Raines when he first came up. You know, teaching the players the right way. Like this is part of your job. You need to do
Yeah.
this. When you can. Um,
Right.
if a road team came in and they were in for a 3-game series, if I saw a guy on Saturday, he'd say, "Hey, is it okay if we do it tomorrow?" And 90% of the time, the player would allow me to do some pregame photos on Sunday, the next day. He lived up to
Mm-hmm.
his word, you know, and you never forget that. And
Yeah.
the players that are humble from day one and they stay that way. Andrew Jones, Rondell White, Marquise Grissom. I worked a lot out of West Palm Beach, where the Braves and the Expos trained,
Mm-hmm.
and they get to know you. So I had to shoot Jim Leyritz. He just came up with the Yankees in Baltimore. He was warming up in the bullpen. I had to go out to the bullpen before the game. He was already, game ready. And he allowed me to take some pictures. An unwritten rule is that you don't ask the starting pitcher of that day to take photos. I needed Charles Nagy. I was in Cleveland. He was pitching that day. I caught him in the locker room just before he was going to, and I said, "I know, Charles, please, he gave me a few seconds, And really, so many great guys, and I'm sure everybody could tell some of the more challenging players as they would read about them during games or with the media. And
Yeah.
Deion
I'll
Sanders was a little challenging.
Yeah.
But
Well,
everybody wants a
Dion
piece of these
Dion
guys.
had multiple spotlights on him since he was like the second coming of Bo Jackson, right? Where, you know, um, a lot of
It
eyes
was
on
very
him.
hard to get Dion to smile. Early
Yeah.
on, I got Barry Bonds to pose with smiling, and after that, he just wanted, no part of me. Um, and
Yeah.
sometimes, if a player has a bad experience with one media person, a photographer, that's it. They cut themselves off. Eddie Murray had an incident with a sports writer once, and he kind of just shied away in general, from the media.
And
But for
that makes
every
sense.
Eddie Murray, there could be, 10 Albert Pujols. I could get Pujols to, do cartwheels. Just the nicest guy from day
Yeah.
one until where he is now.
Throughout his whole career, you just see so many moments where Albert is just he never let the spotlight get to him. And you're talking about a first ballot Hall of Famer, and he to me he stayed true his whole career. That's a great example.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nolan Ryan also intimidated me.
Is that before or after the Robin Ventura fight on the mound?
Always. He always intimidated me. So, but he was nice to give me just a few seconds to get a few images, you know? Um,
Yeah.
I, Here's something. I lived in Brooklyn at the time, and there was a small card show, and Bob Guerin, a Yankee catcher, was making an appearance. And he recognized me from the field, and I said, "Oh, I took some great pictures of you." He says, "I'd love to see him." I said, "Well, I live 2 blocks away." And I said, "If you want to come over." So Bob Guerin came to my house to look at the photos that I took of him, and he selected photos, and I made copies for him and his family. Um, so there were just so many down to earth players. And like I said, Jeff Montgomery, Bob Nepper, just amazing people.
Yeah,
Yount and Molitor. I mean, you would think that
that's
they would be
great.
bothered every time they came to New York.
Yeah.
Biggio and Bagwell, another great duo. Um, I would try and put together group shots. So the stories I'm sharing with you were all like pregame or during photo day,
Yeah.
where I had to do candids or portraits, and then I had to get ready for the baseball game ahead to do all the game action.
So let me ask you this. You alluded to some of the good and the bad. I'm gonna pivot straight into the bad right now because I'm very curious. What was if I know it's probably hard to rank, but if you had to give me one or two that kind of just stand out in terms of just awkward or challenging or almost scary experiences with a player, who would that person or people be and why?
They're in the category by themselves, uh, Mr. Bell and Mr. Bonds.
Wow.
Barry
I'm
threatened
not
me with a
surprised.
Snapple
I'm
bottle
not
once.
surprised with either one. Uh, I'm not. Joey Bell was a hothead, man. I mean, great athlete, but he was a tough cookie.
He really was. As I was saying, Bonds threatened me with a Snapple bottle if I didn't stop taking his picture with my 400 millimeter lens. He didn't even want me to photograph him with my long lens.
Wow.
He was sitting in the dugout in Shea Stadium, and he held up a Snapple bottle like he was going to throw it at me if I didn't move my camera away.
Wow.
Um, Bell was a very tough kind of guy. Um, there was a little incident we had on the field. The coaches had to come to make, say go away. He got really upset with me. Um,
Wow.
and then there was, Manny was challenging, but just not a bad guy. He just didn't want his picture taken that often,
Yeah.
you know.
As wacky and silly as Manny was, on camera and all that, that he was actually quite the introvert and very uncomfortable with cameras. I heard one of my buddies from Dominican Republic tell me that once that he's not the camera loving guy that everybody thought he was.
Yeah, and whatever it was, he could be very challenging. And like I said, he'd say, "Okay, take my picture," knowing I couldn't because his whole cheek was filled up with gum and tobacco. Um, but John Kruk was intimidating. Kirk Gibson,
Really?
they were really
Wow.
rough around the edges, and they weren't so polite in declining to take a photo. A lot of guys would say, not today, tomorrow, another time, or, just use a game action of me. But Kruk and Gibson
Yeah.
were two other guys. But everybody knew
Yeah.
about, when Bond started to become a star, you stayed away from him. Um, but and Dion, Tony Gwynn was great for a while. I remember the year he was retiring. He had security ask that I didn't take his picture while he was sitting in the dugout pregame. But again, like you said, they're humans. They could have a bad day. Everybody wants a piece of them. But I did stay away after a while for those handful of guys. But I
Yeah.
approached
Yeah.
everybody, and I would whatever they said. Yes, no, tomorrow, or one shot, Bo, Jose. Those were the big guys at the time. Canseco and
Yeah.
Bo
Yeah.
Jackson's. Alex Rodriguez came up with Seattle. My one Sports Illustrated cover I shot when he was a September call up in '95.
Yeah.
You had to know who the up and coming players were, because the
Mm.
editors would say, "Hey, do you have images on this kid?" Uh, Maddox or Glavin, and so yeah.
You've had so many good experiences, Scott. Let me ask you this. I'm gonna flip it over now to um, let's call it the
Okay.
feel good story. You shared about how some of you know you shared some comments regarding some of the class acts and great players and all that. Do you have one player or moment with a player that stands out? Just something that really kind of separates from the rest of the group, or someone, excuse me.
Absolutely, Bernie Williams.
Bernie
When
Williams. All right.
Bob Knepper told me a long time ago that if you catch a player's eyes, he may think that you're looking to ask him for something. A lot of players wouldn't look your way. So if I was walking down the hallway with a player, he would just not make eye contact. Bernie Williams was the kind of guy that, because he knew me, would always come over, shake my hand, say hello, and ask me how my family was. This was in 1991 until the day he retired, or when I would see him when he would go play jazz, or if the Yankees would have him do the anthem years later.
Right.
True gentleman and genuine. Bernie
Yeah.
Williams from day one to currently.
That's awesome. That's
Amazing
awesome.
person.
And I'm glad you brought that up too, because not only is he a legendary Yankee, but he is quite an acclaimed musician.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I'd have to say right below Bernie would be Derek. Never changed from day one.
That's awesome.
He had a great upbringing. He had a lot of positive influences, coming up with the Yankees. Never changed toward me. Always would say hello. Recognizing your existence. Randy Johnson or Pedro Martinez would purposely not even look at you if you were in the same room.
Yeah.
Because if you make eye contact, they may think that you may ask them something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Bernie and Derek, aces, the best.
That's great to
Bell and
hear.
Bonds,
And
not so much.
that's so well, there you have it, folks. We learned quite a bit about some of the players we grew up seeing. If you're okay, what do would you be up for another episode to talk a little bit more about some of your other experiences with me down the road?
Absolutely, David. I love sharing these stories to get a little backstory behind the baseball card, or a player, or insight into their lives or personality. And like I said, everybody could have a bad day or whatever, but over 20 years of being a photographer, you really get a true sense of somebody's personality. And I love sharing this stuff. And I'm still afraid of
Absolutely.
Carlton Fisk to this day. He's in
I love
Iowa.
it. I love hearing it. I will tell you, when I look at my Barry Bonds cards after this interview, I am thinking to myself, I'm going to start purposely looking for whatever cards where he's smiling.
He was definitely a young Barry Bonds. If you got him smiling, I can tell you that.
Has to be a Pirates
I was
Bonds,
lucky
right?
enough as a Pirate when he came up. Yeah, there ain't many pictures of Barry smiling as a San Francisco Giant. I can tell you that.
Too
So,
funny.
anytime you want to
Scott,
talk more, I've come across thousands of ball players over a 20-year career, and I'm happy to share with you and the site.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. And yeah, we'll be talking very soon. You have a great rest of your day there, and we'll talk.
Thanks, David. Be well. Take care.
Hey guys, thanks for watching today's video. Please click on the like and subscribe button. Just a couple quick updates. We are officially live on iTunes, Google, as well as Spotify for our podcast. Go to HobbyNetworkGroup.com for more details and links. Thanks for watching today's video and have a great day. Bye.